If Prop 50 passes, what does it say about California democracy? Where will this leave us?
I'm not sure that democracy fares well in a single-party system. At some level, democracy functions best when there's a tension that exists.
A political strategist, founder and editor of the FlashReport, former executive director and vice chair of the California Republican Party, Jon Fleischman.
Well, Jon Fleischman, welcome to State of Gold.
Hey, thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been watching your fine work, and you do a really good job.
Thank you very much. I want to start with what is consuming everyone right now in California. Yesterday, you wrote about the fact that the California Supreme Court, for the second time, has denied Republicans petitioning to stop Prop 50, the gerrymander of electoral districts, congressional districts in California. What's the current state of play in your view?
Yeah. First of all, I should say, it almost the way you phrased it almost sounded like Republicans got to go into a courtroom and have some due process, and all of their arguments were heard. And after carefully weighing all the facts at hand, the Supreme Court, in a careful and close decision, erred on the side of not supporting them. This is like, for the second time, an emergency writ was submitted, and for the second time, a one-sentence denial of consideration of the emergency writ was issued by the court. As I talked about, it's a difficult situation and this isn't unique to California. If you look all around the country, there are Supreme Courts. Some are fair, well balanced, even if they're maybe not balanced in a partisan nature. They're balanced in that the demeanor of the justices cause them to be kind of fair in what they're doing. And then there are some states where you'd say that's a Supreme Court that is in the tank for Republicans. Go to Florida and check out their strict textualist, originalist court, right? What Ron DeSantis has done out there. Or you're here, where you've got 6 jurors on that court who are very activist and have no problem stepping in. They've done it before. But as to your question about kind of the state of play, my original analysis on all of this when it started to happen was that there were just a few things that were standing in between Gavin Newsom and being able to pull this off successfully. And we're past kind of the first stage, which was he's going to have to do some polling himself and figure out if he thinks he can get this done. Because his number one priority, of course, is not congressional district lines in California or anywhere else. His number one priority is that he would like to reside at 16 Pennsylvania Avenue for 4 years after Donald Trump is done with this term. And so that's everything for him. And so obviously they determined through their polling that they wanted to move forward. And so they did. So they pulled the trigger and they start then, the process that we saw work through the legislature. And when I say work through, that means imposed, right? There was no lively debate or discussion or hearings with amendments and considerations. It was just a single party ramming something through kind of a situation. But then you kind of get to the next phase of this thing, which I call the lawfare angle, which is, can the lawyers do something here? Because there's really two potential legal outcomes that are, one's significantly more beneficial than the other, but one of them is a delay, right? If you can gum up the works for just a week or two, that may be all it would take to keep this thing in a very technical sense from being a logistical sense from actually making the ballot in time. They're really threading the needle. And so I think that some of these efforts by Republicans to hit state court have been to try to see if that could get done. And we were all skeptical, to be honest with you. I'm sure the lawyers who filed the writs were equally as skeptical, but you got to do your due diligence. But the other part of the lawfare, which I think has a lot more potential, is a federal litigation in federal courts, where ultimately that road leads to a Supreme Court of a much different stripe. And so I wouldn't call it an in-the-bag Supreme Court, but I would call it it's not even center right anymore. I would call it a very considered right. There's enough breaks on there where you've got some very, very strong ideological conservatives on the court, but there's a few in there, Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett and the Chief, that tend to moderate a little bit. So anyways, we're going to see federal litigation. Some people have told me that the smart play is to wait and litigate until after the ballot measure passes. I don't think people will necessarily wait for that. And I think the most interesting aspect is when you sit at the U.S. Department of Justice and you sit there and you go, especially, for example, if you're Assistant U.S. Attorney Harmeet Dillon, who's from California, former chairman of the San Francisco Republican Party, former Republican National Committee woman from California. If you cut her, she would bleed Republican red, right? So, and she's there as the Assistant U.S. Attorney for Civil Rights. But she doesn't have the luxury of being a Californian in that role. She's there representing the interests of the Trump administration. And as a lot of people have pointed out, if you look at what's happening in California, it's terrible for Republicans. But if you look at the national chessboard of what states may be able to redraw lines and who gets the advantage and who gets the disadvantage, pretty much everyone agrees on a national level, Republicans have more to gain than they have to lose. So when you talk about the feds weighing in, and I hate to get wonky with your guests here, but weighing in to say, you know what, there's a state constitution, it's being violated, there's issues there that we don't think work, and that it conflicts with the Voter Rights Act, the way they've drawn districts in California, that's all fair game. But for that person who's looking for the feds to come in and say, you know what, it's been 5 years since there was a census. And how in the heck can you know how many people actually live in these districts now? And we're suing you because we think there's a due process problem with that. Well, that carried to its natural extension would cancel all mid-decade reapportionment across the entire country, which doesn't mean that argument doesn't get advanced, but I don't think it'll get advanced by the Department of Justice. So the Lawfare, my prediction is in the next week, there'll be some legal stuff and there'll be some after. I think the DOJ probably engages after there's an election, because I think you're going to have federal judges that there's this phrase they use in legalese. I'm not a lawyer. You're not a lawyer. I don't think you're a lawyer. Are you a lawyer?
No.
All right. We're safe. So they call it ripeness, right? Is your case ripe? Are the facts at hand ready to be adjudicated by this court? And it's very easy to imagine a federal judge saying, you know what, you're talking about theoreticals. There's nothing in front of me. The voters haven't voted to do anything. So come see me if it actually passes at the ballot, which unfortunately is really backwards, because boy, a lot of money gets spent and a lot of anxiety happens in that whole process. So now we're to the next stage, and the next stage is it's the ballot, right? It's going before the voters, and as I've written about, I'd rather be Gavin Newsom right now than his opponents. Mm-hmm. I think that there was an early survey that was put out by Politico and the polling firm they're associated with that asked a very fair question, like it was a straight up, do you want to take the work from the commission and put it on hold and have lines drawn externally, right? When you read it, it was like, that's what a nonpartisan person would describe it as. But then, a week and a half later, you get a couple more surveys, and now the question's starting to look more like somebody actually said, how can you skew this the most, right? If you knew that Texas did this and and Donald Trump and blah, 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 now all of a sudden it polls ahead. And I guess what I would say is you have a problem when it's easy to discern the strategy of one side, which is very clear. You want to make this a referendum on Donald Trump in a state where Donald Trump is terribly unpopular. And if you can successfully do that, game over. You have won your ballot measure. If people go to the polling place and they're voting on, I like Donald Trump, so I'm voting against this, or I don't like Donald Trump and I'm voting for it. Okay.
Yep.
But then you get the other side and it becomes a big, what are the best arguments that are used? We can get into it, but there's a lot of discussion taking place.
Well, yes, so that's a good segue. Let's go on the inside, Jon, of the no on Prop 50 movement, right? It's organizing. There are a bunch of different leaders in the Republican Party organizing to stop Prop 50. What is your view on the strategy that's taking shape, or what should it be?
So I'll take this in two parts. First of all, it is coming together. It's awkward, right? So you've got, on one hand, on the opposition side, you've got Charles Munger Jr., who, of course, is the son of Warren Buffett's longtime business partner, who since has passed, but Charles Munger Sr. So Munger's got lots of money, and he feels like he's the proud parent of these two ballot propositions that created the commission and put all the legislative and congressional lines before the voters or before the commission. He doesn't really play well in the sandbox with anybody. He likes to call his own shots. He doesn't consider himself very much of a partisan. And so he, I think, is going to be obsessively focused on how do I get moderate Democrats or non-ideological Democrats? How do I get them to vote against this? How do I get NPP voters to engage? Because in a special election, NPPs oftentimes hang back. They're the least motivated voters if you're categorizing them by party affiliation. And on the other side of the No on 50 campaign, you've got former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, a partisan's partisan, working closely with the former chair of the California Republican Party, Jessica Patterson. And I think, if I had to guess, that the natural division of labor is that the former is going to be, again, focusing on messaging to moderate Democrats and independents and maybe moderate Republicans. And I think they're going to look to the McCarthy effort to make sure you drive out that GOTV, convince Republicans, you got to vote. So that's what I think happens. But in terms of strategy, I would just say this, that you've got to change the narrative. I don't think that I call it the Secretary of State strategy, right? If you simply put out materials that look like they're from the government and it tells you this is how the system works and this is fair, and it's going to be boring to you don't motivate people that way. If I was doing a campaign, I would, my first mailer would be a smoke-filled room with politicians chuckling about the fact that we're using Donald Trump as an excuse, but here's your district, and here's my district, and here's my district, and you put little images of their houses in these brand new districts, and you make it clear that the reason there's a commission in the first place is that these self-serving politicians literally can't control themselves. And they have taken this crisis and used it to self-gain. And I think that if you're able to convince the voters that the self-dealing legislators are worse than anything, that's how you defeat the measure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I can see the cartoon on the front of your website. Have you created this cartoon yet, Jon? When can I see it?
That's
I mean,
right.
it is picture worth 1,000 words. It's exactly the right strategy. Hey, Jon, explain for our listeners and viewers beyond the obvious why it is a bad idea for politicians to write congressional districts themselves and choose their own voters.
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is I don't really want to look past the obvious, because I think the obvious may be the most significant answer. I mean, if you're in California and you happen to be an ultra-liberal Democrat that wants the most democratic legislature as possible, you may not have a problem with the system of drawing your own lines, because that's what happens. But as a practical matter, voters should be picking their politicians, and politicians should not be picking their voters. And what ends up happening is, instead of districts that are drawn based on factors like communities of interest and things that make sense, you end up with these gerrymandered lines. That's a term of art that everyone has come to know, but it's these forked districts where you're able to say, hey, those city blocks aren't great, I'm going to go around them. At least that's what the modern gerrymander is. Now it's like plug in a map to AI and fiddle around with the lines, but you end up with districts that are terrible. And I can tell you, from just having watched the last time that the lines were drawn in Sacramento, which was after 1990. No, actually, it was after 2000. After 2000, the Republicans were complicit in everything because everybody wanted their own district to stay. So the Republicans that were in Congress were perfectly happy not picking up any new seats because they had their seat. And of course, when you're talking about a state legislature drawing congressional lines, they're busy jockeying to make sure, if you're a state senator, did you know that a state Senate seat is larger than a congressional district? Because there's only 40 state senators,
right?
52 congressional members. So you can actually make sure that aging member of Congress, their entire House seat is within your Senate seat. And it all becomes, multiply that by 800 million different kind of variables. And what you get is a process that is not remotely considering what's best for representative government. And instead, it's literally game playing by politicians trying to further their career. And so it doesn't work well. I have some challenges with the solution that Charles Munger came up with how the commission works. But if you were kind of try to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst way to do this and 1 being the best way to do it, I'd say 10 out of 10 worst for the politicians drawing their own lines. And this commission's probably like a 3. So it's a really big improvement. I think that there's some challenges in picking the right people to serve on it. It's hard to divorce politics from a political process entirely. But so it becomes self-serving. And as we talked about, or actually you and I haven't talked about, but I've talked about, you randomly end up with a situation where there's going to be 5 new House seats for California. And one of them happens to be a safe Democrat seat, right, where Senator McGuire, the Senate president, lives and is terming out. Another one happens to overlap most of the district of the current speaker, Derek Rivas, right where he is, Robert Rivas. Sorry, I'm giving the wrong name.
Rivas, yes.
Robert Rivas. And then there just happens to be another one for his mentor, the former Assembly Speaker, Anthony Rendon, down in Los Angeles. He's got another big, beautiful district if he wanted to run for it. And of course, right now, they'll all be coy about it. But it's not an accident because this is a massive state. And, to squeeze Republicans out of districts that are so far from any of the three of them, but somehow the shuffling and the drawing ended up to benefit these leaders is not a coincidence.
Right. It's just such a shame. If Prop 50 passes, what does it say about California democracy? Where will this leave us?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is, and I'm sure there's a saying for this that I don't know, but I'm not sure that democracy fares well in a single party system, right? At some level, democracy functions best when there's a tension that exists between different sides and a push and a pull. And, ask me if I still have that opinion. If I was in a state that was all Republican, maybe I'd have a different opinion as a Republican. But
if it were run well, and
right,
citizens actually receive services, you might say, you know what, I'm sad for my party, but I'm happy that I have no state tax or lower state tax and good services. You might say that.
Well, and of course, you're talking about the ultimate reform of politics altogether, which is if you can reduce the scope and size of government so that government is in charge of less, there's less special interest spending, because what's the point of being in charge of a small government, right? It's only when the government grows immense and vast that everybody wants to be at the table, because they all want their pieces of silver by controlling the levers of government, which is,
right.
It's not a mistake that the single biggest contributor to Yes on 50 is a public employee union, the California Teachers Association, which we could literally do an entire State of Gold podcast dissecting the Teachers Association and how the title is a misnomer for what they actually do. It's just the California Liberal Association.
Right.
And they're all over the map, but and those are the people that are ponying up for Gavin Newsom. It'll be all these people. When you look on the list of donors, it's all going to be people that get something from the state of California, or in the case where Gavin Newsom has already contributed, I think, a couple $1 million from the recall committee that he had. You could just trace that back, and I can guarantee you Edison's in there, and PG&E's in there, and all those big, the Indian tribes are in there, and the public employee unions are in there. So,
Yeah, so it's just pigs at the trough. I think that the biggest moral hazard we have in California is collective bargaining for public sector unions. Unfortunately, Reagan gave it to local peace officers, and then Jerry Brown doubled down for state employees, and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden, a $322 billion budget, when inflation adjusted, it should be $170 billion. We just looked at this. In 1992, when Pete Wilson was governor, $58 billion. Should be $170 billion today. Instead, it's $322. Why?
Yeah.
Just to your point.
Watch the way I do this, John. This is going to impress even you. I wrote a great column on this, and it will appear in the show notes of this podcast.
Oh, I love that.
Wasn't that clever?
That's very good, John. All right, listen, let's zoom out for a minute and talk about California, the state we both love, the state you were born in, the state I moved to 30 years ago and have 5 children growing up in. So I need all the help I can get to lower costs and improve services in California. California ranks near the bottom on every category that matters. We have the most unemployment, homelessness, least upward mobility, least affordability, highest energy costs. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible record. And you just shook your head, right? For those who are just listening, has this added up, this record of shame, finally, to have a little more political competition in California? Democrats have the worst record you can imagine, and yet the state continues to vote Democratic. Are things going to change between now and 2026 November, John, in your view?
No. I hate to disappoint you. So what you just said, somebody said 20 years ago, somebody said 30 years ago, and what we've discovered is there's just this massive amount of wealth along the coast of California, and it seems like, because what you'd want to say is, how long can you run it into the ground where it simply can't function anymore, where it literally, can't function? And I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you that we've got this toxic cocktail where if you go into the state legislature in the majority party, you're either an ideologue, liberal, progressive. I mean, we're talking, there was a time when you knew that there were 4 or 5 really, really, really left-wing progressive Democrats, and they were coming out of Santa Cruz, Berkeley, San Francisco, Santa Monica, you knew who they were. Now you're lucky if you can find 3 or 4 Democrats who are not left-wing progressives. And of course, my favorite example of the inmates running the asylum was before Lorena Gonzalez, who was an assemblywoman. She was the author of the infamous AB5 regulation, shutting down independent contractors. Before she left the legislature, she was the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee. I mean, so the point was that these ideologues became in charge of these committees. And, you talk to some common sense Democrat from the Central Valley who would say, you know what, that bill is crazy. I would never vote for that bill. And then later on, you're like, why did you vote for that bill? Oh, well, Gonzalez wasn't going to let my bill that I cared about out of committee unless I voted for her crazy bill. And so the point being, I think the point I'm making is you've got these liberal ideologues, and then you've got the unions. And the unions, they've got members of the legislature who have only been a union organizer, or they create this symbiotic relationship. As long as you give our employees raises, expand our scope so we can have more employees and more benefits, you could do all that crazy stuff and we just don't care, right?
And 100%. And the unions have done a magnificent job achieving their objectives.
Right,
in California.
exactly. That was going to be the point I made, because when you look through the filter of the top 50, the things that aren't working, and we're ranked 50th in all these objective categories, you forgot the most important category of all. We're ranked number 1 in pro-union, right? And it's and like the visual, I could see another cartoon coming, John. It's the union members like pirates raiding a ship and like taking everything, including the brass fittings off, saying, well, I'm sure we could do something with this. And what's left is what the rest of us have to deal with, this floating piece of wood that has no value left to it because the unions took it all.
Yeah, they took the hubcaps.
They just
took the rims. They took it all.
They took it all. And so I am pessimistic.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that, John. You're a realist. You're a realist, and you're one of the most astute observers of California politics. So my heart sinks, but I remain hopeful, nonetheless.
Well, I mean, look at the last election. Republicans got more market share than we've seen in a long time. We picked up seats in the legislature in places that haven't elected a Republican since I was alive. Yep. And I've been around a while.
Yes.
So there's a reason to be hopeful and optimistic, but I think California's recovery requires a multi-decade process of climbing back. And if we can build on what happened last election cycle, you're going in the right direction. So we'll just have to cross our fingers and hope that, first of all, that we get a Republican into the runoff for governor, because with the top 2, you're not guaranteed that will happen. And then if you've got a strong, articulate gubernatorial candidate who's espousing, common sense up on that dais, there may not be enough Republicans to elect that person, but you know what? That person's going to help turn out more Republicans than ever, and it's going to impact more wins at the Assembly, the Senate, and maybe congressional levels if there's such a thing as a competitive House seat after November.
That's very well said. John, we're going to go to rapid fire. You ready?
All right. I'm ready, I think.
Great discussion. One word, one phrase, whatever strikes you. The first is, if you're king for a day, the single biggest thing you do to fix California.
I would end public employee unions. We talked about it before. If they are gone, it changes everything.
Indeed. Which California political figure, past or present, actually earned your respect?
So I guess I can't cheat and name 2 people, so I'm going to have to default to, this won't surprise you, Ronald Reagan. I've studied a lot. I wasn't around as an adult when he was the governor, but he's somebody who brought his brand of cheerful optimism along with very serious policy chops to the office of governor. And while he did some things that he probably regrets, one of which would have been the collective bargaining deal that he struck, he did so much for the state and to turn it around and lay the groundwork for a revolution for the country.
100%. I love Ronnie. Let's see.
By the way, there's other great Republicans. I mean, I know George Duke Majan well. I know Pete Wilson well. I know Arnold Schwarzenegger well. Many days spent in his smoking tent at the Capitol. Those are all great people. They are not legendary people. Ronald Reagan is in the legend status for
category of his own. What gives you hope?
I mean, what gives me hope is to look around us and see all of the bounty that is California, and to see that this is an amazing place worth fighting for. What gives me hope is that I'm interviewing a cynic named John who spells his name right, and he's got five children, and he's chosen to still stick it out here and raise them here. And if there's people like you, then there's reason for hope.
Indeed,
I feel
I
like
wouldn't
I'm
go anywhere else.
brown-nosing for top interview of the year.
Well, not only can I not go anywhere because my kids are from young to 20, but I wouldn't go anywhere. Last question, fill in the blank. California is?
California is magnificent. And I think that you will find that even though there's a natural tendency to get caught up in complaining, because when you're on the receiving end, when you're going out on the football field and the other team's got 80 players and you have 20 every Sunday, and you keep going back and keep getting beat up, you lose your perspective until you go to the field on a Saturday when nobody's playing and you look around and you say, this is a magnificent place and it's worth fighting for.
100%. Great words to end on, Jon. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work, your voice, your I don't know, your erudite perspective.
I appreciate
End on
it,
a
John.
highfalutin word.
All right, keep up the good work, John.
Thank you, my friend.